There is a persistent and deeply seductive illusion embedded in the human imagination, a beautiful and dangerous dream that Mars is simply a cold desert waiting patiently for the arrival of human pioneers with the right tools and the right ambition. The red planet sits in our night sky with a quiet and almost inviting glow, and somewhere deep in the collective human mind, a story takes root. A story that says all we need is a good enough heater, a pressurized habitat, and the relentless determination that has carried our species across every ocean and over every mountain range on this planet. That story is not merely incomplete. It is a fundamental misreading of the most violent and unforgiving physical realities in the known cosmos. Mars is not a sleeping world waiting to be awakened. Mars is a murdered planet, and the physics of its death sentence is written permanently into the foundational laws of the universe itself. To understand what Mars truly is, you have to begin not with its surface but with its interior, because the story of Mars begins with an engine that stopped running billions of years ago. Deep beneath the surface of the Earth, at the very center of this planet, there is an enormous sphere of solid iron surrounded by a vast ocean of liquid metal spinning continuously under conditions of almost incomprehensible pressure and temperature. That spinning liquid iron is not merely an interesting geological footnote, it is the single most important biological fact about this planet. As that massive ocean of molten metal rotates and churns through the deep interior, it generates something that the laws of electromagnetism demand with complete mathematical certainty. It generates a magnetic field of extraordinary scale and strength, a massive invisible structure that surrounds the entire planet and extends far out into surrounding space. That field is called the magnetosphere, and without it, every living organism on this surface would be subjected to conditions that strip away the fundamental chemistry of biology at the molecular level. The physics here is elegant in its brutality. A moving electrical conductor generates a surrounding magnetic field. The liquid iron core of the Earth is precisely that conductor, moving continuously, generating a field that deflects the most energetic and dangerous particles streaming outward from the Sun and arriving from the deepest regions of interstellar space. Remove that engine, freeze that liquid metal solid, and the magnetic field collapses. The geometry of protection simply ceases to exist, and that is not a hypothetical scenario constructed for dramatic effect. That is the literal physical history of Mars. The Martian core froze. The geodynamo died. Billions of years ago, this smaller planet, with less internal mass and less retained heat than the Earth, ran out of the thermal energy necessary to keep its iron interior molten and mobile. The planetary engine switched off with the kind of absolute and permanent finality that the laws of thermodynamics enforce without exception. And in that moment, the invisible dome surrounding Mars dissolved completely, leaving the surface of an entire world naked and exposed to the full, raw violence of the surrounding universe. Imagine that beautiful medieval castle with its ancient energy dome flawlessly deflecting a continuous barrage of burning projectiles fired from the dark surrounding forest for millions of years. Now imagine the deep underground engine that powers that dome grinding to a permanent stop. The dome vanishes in an instant, the castle burns, the air itself is consumed. That is Mars. That is what happened to Mars. And the physics of what followed is a story of destruction that unfolds across geological timescales with the cold mathematical precision of natural law. Once the magnetosphere collapsed, Mars was left completely defenseless against the most powerful continuous force in this solar system. The sun is not merely a distant source of light and warmth. It is an enormous thermonuclear engine blasting the surrounding solar system continuously with a stream of highly energetic charged particles moving at extraordinary velocities. Protons and electrons, accelerated to millions of miles per hour, pour outward from the solar surface in every direction, and this torrent is called the solar wind. Under ordinary planetary circumstances, a robust magnetosphere intercepts this stream and deflects it safely around the planet. The charged particles curve around the invisible magnetic geometry and continue onward into space, never reaching the fragile atmosphere below. But Mars no longer had that geometry. The solar wind arrived at the unprotected Martian atmosphere and encountered no resistance whatsoever. What followed was not a catastrophic single event, but a continuous and relentless erosion that operated at the molecular scale across billions of years. The energetic particles of the solar wind collided with the upper atmosphere of Mars, transferring momentum to individual atmospheric molecules with enough force to accelerate those molecules beyond the escape velocity of the planet. One molecule at a time, the atmosphere of Mars was stripped away into space. The process is called atmospheric sputtering, and it is one of the most consequential physical mechanisms in planetary science. The sun did not merely heat Mars from a distance. It vacuumed the air off the planet. The scythe of the solar wind swept continuously across the unprotected Martian surface and systematically deleted the atmospheric shield that separates a living world from the void of space. What was once a thicker and more hospitable atmosphere was reduced over geological time to the thin and barely coherent wisp of carbon dioxide that constitutes the Martian atmosphere today. A pressure roughly equivalent to 1% of the atmospheric pressure at the surface of the Earth. Not enough to sustain liquid water. Not enough to provide meaningful protection from radiation. Not enough for a human being to survive for a single second without a pressurized suit. But the removal of the atmosphere introduced a consequence even more devastating than the loss of breathable air. Because once the atmospheric column was sufficiently thinned, the surface of Mars lost its second layer of protection against the most energetic radiation arriving from deep space. Cosmic rays are not the gentle photons of visible light. They are subatomic particles, protons, helium nuclei, and heavier atomic fragments, accelerated to relativistic velocities by the most violent astrophysical events in the galaxy, supernovae, neutron star collisions, and the enormous electromagnetic accelerators surrounding black holes. These particles arrive at Mars from every direction with energies so high that the thin Martian atmosphere does almost nothing to attenuate them. They reach the surface with the kind of penetrating power that passes through substantial thicknesses of material with minimal loss of energy. Here is where the geometry of the radiation problem becomes truly terrifying for human biology. A spacesuit is not a radiation shield. A metal habitat is not a radiation shield. The energetic particles arriving at the Martian surface carry enough penetrating power to pass completely through the walls of any structure that a human mission could realistically land on that planet. They do not stop at the skin. They do not stop at clothing. They do not stop at metal. They pass through human tissue the way a high-velocity projectile passes through water, depositing energy as they go, and the energy they deposit interacts with the most critically important molecular structures in the human body. The DNA within the nucleus of every cell is a tightly wound and extraordinarily precise geometric structure. The information encoded in that molecule depends on the specific arrangement of its chemical components with a fidelity that has no tolerance for random disruption. When a high-energy cosmic ray particle passes through a cell nucleus, the energy it deposits can break the chemical bonds within the DNA strand, creating what physicists and biologists call a double-strand break, a complete severing of the molecular backbone at two adjacent points. The human body has repair mechanisms for DNA damage, but those mechanisms have limits. They were refined by evolution operating on a planet with a robust magnetic field and a thick atmosphere, a planetary environment where the background radiation arriving at the surface was attenuated by multiple layers of physical and magnetic shielding. Those repair mechanisms were never designed to cope with the radiation environment of an unprotected planetary surface, and they cannot. The rate of DNA damage on the Martian surface exceeds the biological capacity for repair. The result is not a dramatic and sudden failure, but a slow and mathematically certain accumulation of cellular damage that progressively destroys the integrity of the genetic material in every cell of the body. The immune system deteriorates. The risk of cancer grows with each passing day. The central nervous system begins to show the effects of radiation damage to neurological tissue. The environment of Mars is not hostile in the way that a desert or a deep ocean is hostile, a challenge that requires clever engineering to overcome. It is hostile at the level of physics, operating on the molecular geometry of biological matter in a way that engineering cannot intercept. There is a profound and humbling physical truth embedded in the reality of Mars that speaks to the fundamental relationship between life and the cosmic environment. Life on Earth did not simply emerge in spite of its environment. It emerged because of a very specific and extraordinarily rare convergence of planetary conditions, conditions that included a large and long-lived molten iron core, a thick and chemically complex atmosphere, a large stabilizing moon, and a position in the solar system that provided the right range of temperatures for liquid water to persist on the surface. Remove any one of those conditions and the entire biological experiment collapses. Mars removed several of them simultaneously and irreversibly. The frozen geodynamo of Mars is not a problem that future technology will solve, because it is not an engineering problem. It is a statement of thermodynamic law applied to the interior of a planet. The core will not remelt. The magnetic field will not return. The solar wind will continue to scour the upper atmosphere for as long as the sun continues to shine. The cosmic rays will continue to penetrate the surface with the indifference of fundamental physical processes operating across galactic scales. The laws of physics do not negotiate with biological ambition. They do not offer exceptions for species that have achieved technological sophistication. They apply with the same absolute consistency to every atom on the surface of Mars that they apply to every other unprotected surface in the universe. Mars is not a frontier waiting to be settled. It is a monument to the violence that the cosmos inflicts on worlds that lose the internal engines powering their survival. The red color of its soil is iron oxide, the rust of a dead planetary interior bleeding through to the surface. The thin atmosphere is the remnant of something that was stripped away by a star that had no awareness of what it was destroying. The radiation that saturates the surface is the consequence of a universe that generates catastrophic events at scales so vast that the energetic debris fills the space between the stars. What stands between a living world and that violence is a spinning ball of liquid metal deep underground, generating an invisible field of force that curves the trajectories of charged particles around the fragile biological experiment on the surface. Earth has that engine. Mars lost it. And the mathematics of what that loss means